Assalamualaikum and good day to all. My name is FARIDATUL BINTI HISHAMUDDIN 065112 and the first presenter of the group. Today I will talk about first fitnah. Following Muhammad's death in 632, Abu Bakr became the new leader of the Muslim community. After reasserting Muslim control over the descendant tribes of Arabia, he sent the Muslim armies against the empires of Byzantine and Sasanian Persia, initiating a wave of conquest which were continued by his successor Umar, bringing about the near-total collapse of the Sassanians and restricting the Byzantine Empire to Anatolia, North America, Africa, and its European holding. The conquest brought Muslims bounteous revenue and lands, particularly in Iraq. The former crown lands and the lands of the Persian aristocracy were now in Muslim hands. Osman succeeded Omar as Caliph in 644 and began a policy of centralizing power by relying on his Umayyad relative, who had opposed Muhammad before converting to Islam. His policies elicited discontent among the Muslim elite and accusation of nepotism. Although Uthman continued the expansion in eastern Persia and west of Egypt, the conquest came to a halt around the latter half of this reign. The first fitnah happened in Islam is Battle of the Camel. Aisyah, Taha, and Zubair opposed Ali's suggestion and gathered in Makkah where called for vengeance for Uthman's death and the election of a new caliph. The rebels raised an army and captured Basra from Ali's governor, inflicting heavy casualties on his men with the intention of strengthening their position. Ali sent his son Hassan to mobilize troops in Kufa and followed them with an army led by Muhammad ibn al-Hanafiyah. After 3 days of failed negotiations, Ali sent Aisyah back to Medina and pardoned all but one rebel. Talha was killed by Ahnaf bin Qais. Marwan joined Muawiyah ibn al-Sufyan, the governor of Syria, as a senior advisor. Then Battle of Siffin. Shortly after assuming power, Ali moved to dismiss most of Uthman's governors, whom he considered corrupt, including Muawiyah, Uthman's cousin. Muawiyah refused to step down and instead told a representative informed Ali that he would recognize the capital of Ali in return for the governorship of Syria and Egypt for life. Ali rejected this proposal. Earlier, he had also refused to temporarily confirm as governor Muawiyah, whom Ali viewed as a contemptible man. In a letter to him, Ali wrote that Muawiyah was welcome to bring his case to Ali's court of justice. He also challenged Muawiyah to name any Syrian who would qualify for a council and asked him to name anyone who would provide evidence incriminating him. The two armies met at Siffin west of the Euphrates early in the summer of 675. Some of the Syrians raised copies of the Quran on the shoutlands, shouting, "Let the book of the court be the judge between us." The main battle began on 20 July and lasted for 3 or 4 days. Muhammad's force stopped fighting after Muawiyah appealed to the Quran when he was told his army could not win the battle with Khalifah. Ali's son-in-law, Al-Hussein al-Baghdadi, writes in a farewell to Islam. The majority in Ali's army pressed for the rapidly neutral Abu Musa al-Ash'ari as the representative to represent them at the Council of Khalifa 657. At the first meeting at Udru, Amr violated his early agreement and fled to Makkah, where he was disgraced and expelled. Ali denounced the conduct of the arbitrators as contrary to the Quran and began a new expedition to Syria. Next, Battle of Nahrawan. After the Battle of Siffin, a group separated from Ali when he agreed to settle the dispute with Muawiyah through arbitration. Most of them had earlier forced Ali to accept the arbitration but now exclaimed that the right to judgment belonged to the court alone. The remaining opponents of arbitration gathered in Nahrawan on the east bank of the Tigris. The Kharij denounced Ali as Caliph and declared him, his followers, and the Syrians as infidels and instead elected Abdullah ibn al-Wahid al-Wasiti as their Caliph. Ali received the news of the Kharij violence and moved to Nahrawan with his army. There, he asked the Kharij to surrender and murderers and return to their families. The Kharij, however, responded definitely that they were all responsible for the murders as they all considered it easy to kill both Ali's followers and the Syrians. After multiple failed attempts of this escalation, Ali announced an amnesty that did not apply to murderers and barred his army for commencing hostilities. The remaining Kharij, estimated at 2,800 at 10, were vanquished by the vastly superior army of Ali. The injured, estimated at 400, were pardoned by Ali. In January 661, when praying at the mosque of Kufa, Ali assassinated by the Kharij Abdullah al-Rahman ibn al-Majam. The peace treaty with Hassan. After the assassination of Ali in January 661, his eldest son Hassan was elected as Caliph in Kufa. Muawiyah shortly marched on Kufa with a large army, while Hassan's military response suffered defections in large numbers, in part facilitated by army commanders and tribal chiefs who had been swayed to Muawiyah's side by promise and offers of money. After a failed assassination attempt on his life, and one Hassan, who by now only ruled the area around Kufa, agreed to a peace treaty with Muawiyah in 661. Under this treaty, Hassan ceded the Caliph to Muawiyah in exchange for a general amnesty for people and the return of the Caliph to Hassan after Muawiyah's death. However, Hassan died in 669 at the age of 46. It is believed that he was poisoned at the instigation of Muawiyah. Muawiyah was crowned as Caliph at a ceremony in Jerusalem in 661. That's all for me. Next, we will move to the next presenter. Thank you.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I'm HAZIRAH binti Muhammad Ali and my matrix number is 065673. Today, I'll be presenting about the second fitnah, or known as Second Islamic Civil War. The second fitnah or second Islamic Civil War was a period of general political and military disorder that afflicted the Islamic Empire during the early Umayyad dynasty. Following the death of the first Umayyad Caliph Muawiyah I, there seems to be a lack of solid consensus on the exact range of years that defined the conflict, with several different historians dating the second fitnah differently. Some sees the end of Muawiyah's reign in 680 as marking the beginning of the period, while the year 683, following the death of Muawiyah's son, the Caliph Yazid I, is cited by others. Similarly, the end is variously dated from 685 after the ascension of Caliph Abdul al-Malik ibn Marwan to 692 following the death of Ibn az-Zubair and the termination of his revolt. The date 683 to 685 seems to be the most commonly used. The second fitnah was a time of complexity in the Islamic world, involving a number of different occurrences that were seemingly not directly connected with one another. A brief sketch of the major events of the period may, however, be given as follows. The first Caliph Muawiyah I was succeeded upon his death in 680 by his son Yazid I. Yazid's first opposition came from supporters of Hussein ibn Ali, who was the grandson of the Prophet Muhammad and the son of the former Caliph Ali bin Abi Talib, who had been assassinated. Hussein and many of his closest supporters were killed by Yazid troops at the Battle of Karbala. This battle is often cited as the definitive break between the Shia and Sunni sect of Islam, and until this day it has been commemorated each year by Shia Muslims on the day of Ashura. Following these occurrences, Yazid faced a second revolt from Abdullah ibn az-Zubair, who was the son of Sahabi az-Zubair ibn al-Awwam and the son of Asma binti Abu Bakr. Ibn az-Zubair rebellion was seen by many as an attempt to return to the pristine values of the early Islamic community, and his revolt was welcomed by a number of parties that were unhappy with the Umayyad rule for various reasons. Following the sudden death of Yazid and his son Muawiyah II in 683, Ibn az-Zubair gained widespread recognition as Caliph. In Syria, Marwan ibn Hakim, a cousin of Muawiyah I, was declared a Caliph. Marwan had a short reign, dying in 685, but he was succeeded by his able son Abdul al-Malik. Ibn az-Zubair was isolated in the Tihamah and the Hijaz regions when Kharijite rebels established an independent state in Central Asia, Arabia in 684. Other Kharijite uprisings followed in Iraq and Iran, while Shias revolt in Kufa to avenge the death of Hussein and to promise another of Ali's sons as a candidate for Caliph. Eventually, order was restored by Syrian forces supporting Abdul al-Malik. He was able to defeat all of his various rivals, and his army killed Ibn az-Zubair in 692, bringing this period of exceptional turbulence to an end. That's all from me. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Nurul and my metric number is 067826. The third fitnah, which in Arabic is al-Fitnah al-Thalitha, is a series of civil wars and rebellions against the Umayyad Caliphate that began with the overthrow of the Caliph al-Walid II in 744 century AD and ended with Marwan II's victory over various revolutions and rivalries for his caliphate in 747 century AD. After the death of Hisham bin Abdul al-Malik, Walid became his successor and ruled for 1.5 years. He was a man of perseverance with great strength and took part in athletic wrestling. When he heard of the courage of a person with great power, he sent people to bring the person to him so that he could test himself. He also preoccupied himself with drunkenness and committing the heinous adultery without hindrance. When the nobles of the same house saw the deeds of their prince, namely living in reprehensible abomination, they asked the adherents of their religion, that is Qur'an, the reader of the Quran, what he took of his ruler. They replied, because Walid has insulted the honor of our government and violated the order, he deserves to be put to death. Following their orders, the nobles entered the royal place and then killed him with a sword while he was asleep in a drunken state. When Marwan heard of the death of his son Walid, he immediately gathered his troops. He left Ishaq bin Muslim at Armenian. Walid, with his army, went to war with his people in revenge for the death of his son Walid. He met some of the men from their house who were killed and convinced them to join him. He also gathered all the men from his ancestral house to fight. There were many sons of Ismail who had united in one large camp. They advanced and crossed the great river, the Euphrates. Then they confronted each other near the border of Damascus. They lined up to fight there for several days and fought each other. When the day approached in the evening, when the time of the last prayer was near, they broke away from the battle and sat weeping over the fall of each other. They collected the bodies and buried them. They say, we are one people with one language and one rule. More than that, we are also brothers, so why do we kill each other with the sword? After that, they were still fighting the next day, and the fighting continued. However, in the end, Marwan won the war, but Umayyad power under Marwan II was never fully restored. The civil war escalated into the Abbasid revolution in 746-750, culminating in the Umayyads' overthrow and the Abbasid Caliphate establishment in 749-750 AD. That's all from me. Thank you. Now we'll move to the next presenter.
Thank you, Alia. Assalamualaikum and good day to everyone. My name is Nurul Hawa and I will be talking about the fourth fitnah that happened during Islam's civil war. Caliph Harun al-Rashid was the most notable ruler of the Abbasid dynasty, and beside his legendary status in stories and folk tales, the actual man had an unbeatable personality. He supported the arts and education, and wished for Muslims to lead the world in these areas. The Baitul al-Hikmah, House of Wisdom, in Baghdad's Grand Library was designed for this purpose. The classic Greek works were translated into Arabic, and these works eventually provided fuel to the greatest minds of Europe to give the world a rebirth, that known as the Renaissance. The real challenge for Harun came from his own family. He needed to devise a succession plan. Al-Amin and Al-Ma'mun were two of his most prominent sons. Harun wished to pass the throne to Al-Amin, but the realm was divided between the two brothers. Al-Ma'mun was to rule over his territories as a subject of the Caliph and his heir. This strategy, however, was doomed to fail. Following Harun's death, civil war erupted between his sons, engulfing the entire realm in chaos. The conflict known as the Fourth Fitnah or Great Abbasid Civil War that happened between 811 until 819th century. From the Al-Amin side, 40,000 soldiers were dispatched under Ali, while from Al-Ma'mun side, they dispatched a contingent of 3,800 troops under an officer named Tahir al-Hussein to establish an advanced post at the walled city of Ray. Despite initially having the upper hand, Al-Amin soon began to suffer significant losses in battle, and Baghdad became the sole stronghold of his rule. After a protracted siege by Al-Ma'mun forces, the Caliph Al-Amin decided to surrender. Al-Amin was murdered in captivity by some rogue Persian soldiers. Some claim that Al-Ma'mun was genuinely saddened by his brother's death, and to make amends,
adopted his sons as his own, and moved quickly to punish the perpetrators. Caliph Al-Ma'mun took over between 813 until 833 century, and while Islam's golden age was nearing its end, Al-Ma'mun ruled the caliphate until he died at the age of 46. He was an attractive figure, diligent, humane, intellectually curious, and a great sponsor of learning. But the war of the two brothers had fatally weakened the military class that comprised the principal support of the Abbasid dynasty. Our group have covered the first Islam civil war until the fourth. So that's all from us, and thank you for lending your ears.